friends. My name is Stephanie Romero, and I am the founder and executive director of Awaken Pittsburgh. I want to welcome you to our podcast, The Ripple Effect. Awaken Pittsburgh is a nonprofit dedicated to fostering well-being, empathy, and compassion for all by teaching and encouraging mindfulness and meditation practices. I also want to take a moment to let you know that Awaken Pittsburgh offers many other opportunities for practice and connection. For example, you can join our online community, which features a space to more deeply explore the topics we cover with our guests. We have weekly posts to spark thought, practice, and reflection. I hope you will come join us to explore, connect with others, and deepen your practice. You can find out more at awakenpittsburgh.org. Thanks so much for joining the Ripple Effect podcast. Today, I'm really happy to be able to talk to Helen Stickney. Helen is a friend, a fellow meditator, and just a wonderful human. She's also a meditation guide, a grief companion, an end-of-life doula with over 40 years of meditation practice. Helen is a founding member of Pittsburgh Community Death Care. She also works in hospice administration and green burial. Helen holds a PhD in theoretical linguistics and is trained in mindfulness, integrative thanatology, and a range of somatic and contemplative healing arts. She supports individuals and families through illness, dying, death, and grief, offering reflection, ritual, and grounded presence each step of the way. When she's not working, Helen can usually be found in the woods. Helen, I'm excited to have this conversation. You and I have been in relationship, I don't know how many years? Many, many years.
Yeah, it might be close to 15 at this point.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm just excited about deepening our knowing of each other. So thank you for agreeing to join the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
So I love to start these conversations by asking just what was your journey with mindfulness or meditation? How did you come to practice?
Well, I was raised with meditation. My mother was a transcendental meditator. She still is, although she does some other practices now as well. But I remember, so she was a stay-at-home mom, at least for the first decade of my life. And I remember her meditating every morning. And that was probably the one time when she wasn't available. I mean, I'm sure if there was an emergency, she would have been available. But the family story is that at age 5, I came to her and said, I want to do what you do. And I guess in transcendental meditation practices, children don't get mantras or don't get a practice until age 7. So I had to wait a very long 2 years to, roughly 2 years. And then I was given a children's meditation practice. So I grew up with meditation as part of my life, which is I'm incredibly grateful for. Um, And, as a teenager, I stepped away from it a little bit, but it was always a practice that I could come back to. And honestly, it was part of my identity, I think, in many ways, that I was someone who meditated. And it wasn't until I moved to Pittsburgh in 2008 that I started engaging with people who were practicing mindfulness, specifically in the form of Buddhism. But um, so that would have been, yeah, 2008 was 2009, maybe, was when I started meditating in a more mindful capacity. And it was mind blowing for me because I had always meditated with a mantra in, you know, if I'm perhaps with other people, but with my eyes closed and kind of hidden away from the rest of the world, because meditation was something you did separate from life, or at least that's how I perceived it. And then it supported you as you came back out into the world. But the idea that there could be no separation between my practice and my life, which was, it just opened up a whole world of healing and growth and relationship to the present moment that I had not had. However, it was very much supported by the fact that I had been sitting quietly with myself for roughly my entire life. Um, and so, yes, that's it. So my journey has just deepened since then. It because it so radically took hold. The second I saw what it what my meditation practice could be by, having an open-eyed practice often and carrying that sense of the present moment off of the cushion. Yeah, I actually don't know. It just, so many things in my life changed and so much opened up for me that it was sort of instantly integrated into how I walk in the world now.
That's just the loveliest story. I have kind of known little pieces of that being part of your meditation journey,
Mm.
but I didn't know the whole story, and I just absolutely love that you received practice instructions at age 7. I just think that's just so touching. And I'm kind of thinking about what you're saying, and I have had this conversation with other people. I had a man approach me and he said, it was really a weird conversation. I wrote a book on mindfulness. And what I've come to understand is that that's not near as effective as mantra practice. And he made a real juxtaposition of those.
Huh.
And I said, huh, that's interesting because for me, using a mantra is another way of practicing mindfulness because mindfulness for me means resting your attention on an object, and that object could be a mantra. So I'm just curious how, because you kind of clearly named mindfulness practice as something that happened later. So how does
Mm.
that, how do you frame that for yourself? And does what I think about, like, how does that land for
Yeah.
you?
I agree with you. I mean, one of the ways that I had come to understand meditation is there are many different ways to meditate, and eh, and sometimes it's, some ways are more suited to one's personality than others, and sometimes it's that they have different purposes, right? That one might choose to engage in one form of meditation to achieve a particular result, and that a different type of meditation might achieve a different result. Um, in the practical sense, I think all of it is a practice of showing up for our lives in a more meaningful way. And I agree with you that mantra practice could be, is, I also, I not could be, is a practice of gathering the mind in one spot, and that focus in the case of a mantra practice is the mantra. And I suppose we should name that transcendental meditation is often taught as, I haven't taken I haven't been engaged with the transcendental meditation community for decades, so I want to be careful about how I describe it. But what I learned was sitting quietly 20 minutes twice a day in as quiet a room as possible, um, and silently sitting with a mantra. So silently repeating a mantra. Um, and with the similar sort of instruction of bringing the mind back to, like, letting thoughts come and go, and just continuing to be with the mantra. What was different for me with the mantra practices that I learned with transcendental meditation was that it was very much a retreat um, into the self, away from the world, and that what I understood in the communities that I was in as a child was that the goal was to transcend the human experience. And with mindfulness, I learned that if we're talking about mindfulness as a spiritual practice, I learned that the transcendence was in the ordinariness of the human experience. Um, and so for me, in the way that I encountered meditation throughout my life, those two things seemed very starkly different. And again, maybe I had more of a child's understanding of meditation in the beginning, so that may influence my understanding of TM, but it felt to me like we're going to do this practice separate from our lives, and it's going to somehow infuse our lives magically. And that's a little bit unfair because there's a lot of science on TM to show how it does affect our lives in radical ways. I just really love the idea of bringing the practice forth into every moment of our lives very consciously.
Yeah, and everything you're saying really resonates with me because of course you and I have both studied under Tibetan teachers, and the idea that we're just really trying to unearth the natural ordinary state that gets covered up by all the crap life layers on top of us,
Yes.
right? That's really just being still and noticing that under it all, right? At the root, there's just some ordinary, plain sense of being that's
Yep.
just our natural inherent worth and dignity.
Yes.
And the other piece that you were naming is that when we get in touch with that, along with compassion and empathy for the suffering of all people, all beings,
Yes.
then it becomes socially engaged Buddhism.
Mm-hmm.
Or
Yeah.
socially engaged practice, which is where you are like taking it off the cushion. And so into your daily life, but also when it's coupled with that compassion, and which will use this as a segue
Sure.
because your work in the world is working with death and grief. And so this idea of integrating practice into all that we do, I just would love to hear you speak to how that idea and practice has supported you in your work as a death doula, as a grief companion. Where do you see the connections for yourself personally in supporting you in the work? Because that's hard work, and in supporting the ones that you're caring for.
Thanks for that question. It's hard for me to separate it out because it's so integral to everything that I do. Um, but yeah, so I work with a lot of people who, how do I want to phrase this? So I'm showing up for people who are dying. I'm showing up for people who are watching their loved ones die. I'm showing up with people who have experienced a loss. And often that can feel very like a crisis. It can feel like a transition. It can be very emotionally intense. Um, it doesn't generally feel like a crisis for me. I think the biggest crisis for me is having the time and energy to hold all of it. Um, but I don't tend to internalize it very much. Um, oh, there's so many things I could say here, and I want to see if I can stay focused because there's two pieces, right? You said how does mindfulness support me, and how does it support the people that I work with? Um, for me, it's been a lot of it's multifaceted. In one sense, it's just simply being able to notice what my experience is, being able to actually notice when it is too much, when I'm attempting to hold the experience of too many people, or too many hours of the work. And instead of trying to power through because I'm still standing, having the capacity to pause and reflect and notice what I might need, And even just that capacity of pausing, right? Rather than, training in mindfulness has helped me to pause rather than to constantly just keep reacting to stimulus, constantly keeping feeling like I have to put out every fire immediately, rather than understanding that some fires are self-contained, right? Or some fires are necessary. Um, for, fire metaphor is great because you think of, some fires are necessary for regeneration. Some fires are, yeah, as I said, are self-contained. And they don't necessarily need me to jump in immediately, that it's okay to pause, that there's power in that pause, and that I can rest. And it just helps bring me back to my present moment, to my natural state, to my restfulness. So yes, um, that's where it is for me right now, and that's how I recharge, is my dedicated sitting on a cushion meditation practice, or being out in the woods and just being with things as they are. Um, but in respect with working with people who are at these very tender transition points in their lives and deaths, I don't well, as a practitioner, it allows me to show up in a very direct and meaningful way. But then I also, even if I'm not directly teaching mindfulness to the people that I work with, a lot of the work I do is redirecting to the present moment, helping people to see that the present moment is bearable and okay and something they may want to show up for. Um, or to show up for it and realize, I can't, this is too much for me. And then working with, well, how do we help you to find the tools you need to be able to bear what life is asking you to go through right now.
Beautiful. I love the in both of supporting yourself and supporting other, there's a theme of noticing and awareness that I feel from what you're saying. And as a care provider, um, I really appreciate that you're naming the need for rest and self-care.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I just love that you're naming that. I think you even said instead of powering through, and that's, I find myself doing that. Like I'm just gonna power through today. I'm just gonna keep
Right.
going. You know what I mean? Like I hear that in my own self-talk.
Well, I used to power through. It used to literally be, I can still stand, I can still function, I'm going to keep going. And I would get very sick. I would go until I got migraines and collapsed. Um, and yeah, with that mindful awareness has come more and more awareness and acceptance of my capacity. And you always hear people say, well, if you don't care for yourself, it's harder to show up for others. And I knew that intellectually, but the more my practice deepens, the more I'm able to really see it, that I will better serve somebody if I am well rested. They may feel like it's not fair that I can't show up, that I've chosen to rest instead of showing up for them. But often, even in that space of not immediately having one's needs met, other things, that's something else I've noticed with the people that I work with, that sometimes when I'm not available, they come to incredible realizations or breakthroughs on their own, or something shifts, that when am able to show up again, I feel like, oh, whatever we might have done together was just done without me. Um, yeah.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. Just to dive a little bit more into specificity,
Mhm.
what particular practices or techniques do you think are supportive of people in case there's someone out there listening that's going through the grieving process,
Mhm.
or even experiencing an illness themselves that is forcing them to confront their own imminent death or mortality, right? Are there specific practices that you find really useful that you could recommend?
Well, I think there is a lot of power in just basic mindfulness, just being with the breath or some other chosen anchor. Um, that idea of being with things as they are. So, depending on who I'm speaking with, I don't generally just instruct on the breath anymore. I find a lot of comfort in the breath, but I like to always open with um, a range of options for where we would like to gather the mind. So choosing something that a place in our sensory field generally where we can rest our attention. So whether that is the flow of the breath moving in and out of the body or a specific spot where we can feel the breath, or whether that's the sensation of the hands resting on the legs, um, or maybe it's the sounds in the room. Um, or maybe it's something I really love is helping. So, okay, so now I'm getting excited about different techniques and let me stay with this one. Just the capacity to tune into the present moment by way of some sensation in the room, some sensation that I feel safe in. Maybe it's the feeling my feet in my shoes or my feet touching the floor and just resting my mind there, noticing what else I'm feeling, allowing myself to notice the sounds and the thoughts, and just making a commitment to rest my mind in one spot and return when I'm distracted. I feel like that is such a powerful practice, and just I'm going to be here right now. And it might feel really awful. I might also be feeling terrified or really sad. And it's training in, again, noticing, oh, I can be here right now. This is bearable. And I think that simple technique is so important. And if it's not bearable, if it's still like if that being still with the present moment in a sensory based way, it's a couple other things that, how do I want to phrase this? Something I find particularly powerful is connecting with the earth. And this still involves orientation to the body. I guess pretty much everything I do has some somatic aspect to it, but it doesn't have to be as personal as, the sensation of my hands or the sensation of my breath. Sometimes I like to suggest people tune into the sensation of gravity, which is kind of a vague concept, but it's the idea. There are two ways that I like to think about it. One is it is a trustworthy force. The force of gravity is always there, whether we think about it or not. We are never going to go flying off into space. And it's just always there, and we're held. We're held by the earth because we are of the earth. There is this incredible force. I even like to think of it as an expression of the earth's love, that the earth just loves us so much and we belong, and that we can tap into the fact that we are connected and perhaps even soften to that pull can allow our muscles to soften a little bit. um, or maybe again, maybe we don't want to think about what's happening in the body right now, but just noticing, oh, I'm touching the earth. And that is always true. I mean, right now I'm in the second floor of a building, but I'm still held here. I'm still not floating off. I'm held. I belong. And I think a third practice that I love is just being out in nature with people, acknowledging what's real for them, acknowledging, oh, this really sucks right now, or it's really stressful, or it hurts. Sometimes it just physically hurts to be in our bodies, and just being able to go outside and feel the breeze, or step into the woods and maybe take off our shoes and feel moss or rocks. Just allowing an orientation to the present moment that, again, isn't personal, but is uh, real. And so in this way, perhaps it's a gentler approach to the present moment, right? I'm touching moss right now. It's cool. It's alive. It's beautiful. And my heart is so heavy. And so I feel like all the mindfulness practices allow for multiple things to be true at once. But when we're in nature, that we can focus on something external that is raw and real and beautiful and tactile, and then gently touch in with the sadness or the pain, and hold, and in a slightly less heightened way, hold both and train in that.
I really, really love this image of gravity and the earth holding us be an expression of the earth's love. That just so, it just, yeah, it just really touched me. I think that's so beautiful, Helen. Really, really beautiful imagery, and especially for someone who's experienced so much suffering, experiencing in the moment so much suffering, that's just a really beautiful kind of metaphor for our lives and being here in these bodies and this experience. And yeah, that's really beautiful. I'm also curious, I don't know where I've heard this concept necessarily. I think there is a concept of this in Tibetan teachings, but also just in like folk, there's this idea of a good death,
Yeah.
right? I'm just curious, like, what does that mean for you? And
I
I guess my preconception is something like, and maybe it's because I was raised Catholic, like you have a good death if you have accepted Jesus and you're free of sin or something like that. And I think in Tibetan Buddhism, it's like I don't even know for sure what it would be in Tibetan Buddhism, but you're ready to enter that bardo state. Like somehow you're ready and you have resolved whatever or as much karma as you could have. I don't know. But what are your thoughts
that,
on
that
that?
I personally think that phrase is a setup. Um, Give me a moment because my I just dissociated as I said that, because I know a lot of people really like that term. In fact, if you go to my Death Care Collective's website, we talk. It's all about, that it's on the front page, I believe. Um, and a lot of people in the death care world, especially the alternative death care world, talk about wanting to help people have a good death. But I think so. There's a number of facets here, but I think it's a setup because we don't always get to have a good death. So, from the perspective of Catholicism or Tibetan Buddhism, um, there's this idea that you have to die a particular way or else something bad will happen, right? And I have certainly had clients show up to work with me as a death doula, and say, "I've read the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and I want you to help my loved one." So this is family members wanting me to help their loved ones have the best death they can spiritually, and I am likely to be able to help with that. In various ways, but I will do my very best to reframe it. You know, maybe we can work with your loved one's fear of death, right? So that the point of their passing is more comfortable for them. Um, and I think the other thing to name is that we die like we live, and we live in a society that doesn't let all of us thrive. So one's socioeconomic status, one's skin color, one's gender identity and sexuality influences how we are treated by society, by the medical care system, if medical care is involved in our death, even by the funeral industry, right? So um, a lot of people have a lot of challenges to dying well. Just like some of us have challenges to getting adequate health care or living the way that we would choose to live if the system were different. Um, and so saying that there is the possibility of a good death, I think can set us up to think somebody's going to help somebody's going to give us the magic whatever to make all this better at the end. And I would much rather show up for someone who is dying or someone who is grieving and say, let's find a way to make this the best it can be given the circumstances. Um, the best it can be given the circumstances. So going back to what does a good death look like? It's one where we feel, so I will specifically talk for the dying person. Um, it's one where I would hope the dying person has been able to achieve some level of acceptance and peace with the life that they've lived and the way that they are dying. That doesn't mean it has to be okay, but being able to relax at the end and I was gonna say, and let it be okay, even if it's not okay, right? And I guess that's the same for the family members, that feeling like I showed up the best I could for my loved one, like allowing the circumstances for everybody to show up the best they can for things as they are.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And I'm just thinking the way that you phrased it sounds like what we try to do every moment of our practice, to
Yes.
just show up, see what's present, bring a level of acceptance and non-judgmental quality to it, and see if we can just be with it.
And love. As soon as you said that, at the beginning when you were introducing this, you were talking about love and compassion, and I haven't really mentioned
Yeah.
much of that, but also bringing as much love and compassion and tenderness to the truth of what my death looks like, or the truth of what my loved one's death looks like, or my grief process. Like, how can we bring in that love to envelop that painful truth? How can we find ways to lovingly hold our experience? And now that I've said that, I think I focus more on my own showing up with love and helping people be in the present moment. And I don't know, I'm curious now. I'm going to have to pay more attention to how much of my languaging with people is about their own sense of love and compassion. I'm sure it's threaded throughout, but when I'm speaking to you now, I was not really focused on that piece, but it must. That ability to find love and compassion must also be there for us to be able to be with the present moment.
Yeah, and that's bringing me to the idea of empathy, right? Because I think that's basically what you are describing when we're expressing that love for the and care for the suffering of another, right? And so I also know that there is such a thing as compassion fatigue, and there is such a thing as, I forget the term they use for empathy. There's a term when you lack empathy, like you just can't. I forget it. But I'm curious, how do you maintain that level of love, compassion, empathy, whatever word you want to put there? How do you continue to show up from that place, right? Because people do experience kind of burnout of that over time. So I'm just curious if how that works for you.
It The burnout that I have experienced comes from when I'm showing up when I need to rest, or when I'm, not setting limits on my own time and energy. But I never experienced compassion fatigue, and I don't know how to talk about that. I just fall in love with everyone I work with. I just I and from that place of love, it's a joy. And people say to me, "And how do you deal with so much suffering all the time?" It's a joy for me. And I can't tell you how to train in that, right? I just know that for me, I really do. I just fall in love with people. And so being with them is not exhausting. It doesn't cause me to burn out. It's the commitment of my time that is something that I struggle with. Um, yeah. Yeah, I really do place myself in everyone's shoes, and it just makes me love them more. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it totally does. And I feel, having known you for a while and having seen you kind of evolve into this career, what I'm feeling in my heart right now is you are really living your purpose in this moment.
Yes.
And
I
I
don't have anything else
like
to
when I
say, but
hear you
yes.
talk
Yeah.
about it, like I'm like, Helen is really living into her purpose. And I feel, my work with Awaken has been that journey for me. And it doesn't always feel like that, like I'm dealing with bookkeeping BS and I'm like, you know what I mean? Or writing another grant, doing another budget, whatever. That nitty-gritty stuff doesn't always fuel me, but there is something when you really find your purpose that energizes you even in the face because you're coming at it for love. That's really the motivation, and it's coming from your heart's desire, you know. So I just think that's really, really beautiful, and I just, I know a little bit of your journey to arriving to this, and so I applaud you for doing things that were really, really hard.
Yeah.
We have both stepped away from careers that the world would say, you should be doing that. You should be glad. You
Yeah.
should, this is that you've attained this. And we've both stepped away to do kind of alternative, underpaid kind
Yep.
of work.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And when I like hear you talk about it, I'm just like, yeah, this is her heart's work.
Mhm.
So I just feeling really touched by that, Helen.
And I don't know how, like, I always want to be able to share that with people. Like, I want to help. This is separate from the work that I do. I just want to help all my friends find that. And I don't think there's a technique for that. But and also, you know, I just looked at my retirement portfolio yesterday and went, "Oh my goodness, I'm not going to be able to ever quit working, right?" But it was so I was like, if I'm well enough to show up for I would do this for the rest of my life, right? And so it's like I just trust that because I'm following my heart, somehow it'll work out.
Yeah, I'm right there with you on that. Yeah. Woo, it's real. It is real. Well, I'm just curious if, as we entered this conversation, there was anything you wanted to share that I didn't ask about. Was there something you thought it was important to say about your practice, your work, anything at all?
I think the only thing I'd like to share is that we as a society are woefully unprepared for the end of life. And that I would encourage anyone who's listening to this to think about, if I were to die tomorrow, what well, there's a few threads of that. One is, would I be okay with that? That's my daily practice. One of my daily meditative practices is, if I died tomorrow, would I be okay with the life that I've lived? And that's really helped me orient my choices, making amends, all sorts of things. Um, but also just on a very practical level, death is expensive, and it can leave a lot of other people with a lot of baggage if we haven't really wrapped up our life. And it's never too early to start that. And so even if we can't control whether we get cancer or when we're going to die, we can control how much of a mess it's going to be, right? Whether that's just talking to a few, people, funeral directors will do pre-planning with you for free, right? You can sit down with your local funeral director and just talk about what what do I need to know practically about dealing with my body after death? Or what, there's also, having an advance directive, instructions for someone to speak for you at the end of your life if you can't speak for yourself. But there's a million things, passwords and money and all sorts of things. And dealing with that now means that it's a gift to your loved ones, and it's a gift to yourself to not have to deal with that when it's crisis time, to not have to deal with that when there's suddenly a terminal illness diagnosis or when there's a heart attack. Um, so I think that's my other mission is to help people avoid this. That actually might tie into a good death. Let's avoid chaos at the end. Let's let there be room for spiritual practice, for just hanging out with our families and being and sharing love. rather than scrambling to figure out all the details at the last minute.
Yeah, some really good and practical advice for all of us, especially those of us of a certain age.
It gets more, probably a good idea the older you get, but
Yeah,
again, yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. The question that I ask absolutely everyone that comes on the podcast is, do you have a favorite, it could be mindfulness or death related resource that you could recommend for people to read, to listen to Google? Is there some resource that you, either a mindfulness one that you love, that's your go-to, whatever?
In general, or for, oh, you said both, either.
Either, whatever comes to mind.
I hadn't thought of this beforehand. Um, what comes to mind for me is actually just taking time to contemplate death. As
Mm-hmm.
I said before, I mean, my favorite practice is just sitting still and being with my breath.
Mm-hmm.
But as I said before, it has changed my life to every day think about, I may die one day, and I don't know when that's going to be.
Yep.
And what does that mean for my life right now?
Yep.
And one way that people can think about that, one way to do that might be to look up Atisha's 9 contemplations. So there's a character in historical Buddhism, perhaps, yeah, who wrote a number of contemplations of death. And I'm sure you can Google this and find even people reading it, reading the various contemplations. I encourage people who are new to this to just take it slow, just like touch in with one of them.
Love
Um,
it.
don't dive into the deep end of, oh my God, I'm going to die. If you've never done it before, just do it a little bit at a time. And then if you want to dive deeper, um, once or twice a year, I offer a guided death meditation and sound bath. So a friend of mine uh, plays crystal bowls, and I guide people through visualizing their own disintegration of identity and body. And seeing as we have to walk away afterwards, we go into the death space and then into rebirth. Um, it's not religious at all. It's very open in just envisioning the end, as a practice of, again, just like aligning more with our lives. And I think some people offer similar practices. You might be able to find them online if you don't want to wait for mine. And they often get called, unfortunately, living funerals. I say unfortunately because that's also a term for when you have a celebration of your own life before you die. But people can certainly reach out to me. Um, I don't know if you are going to share my email address, but they're welcome to, or through my Death Care Collective, they can.
Yeah, your link will be on there, the link that you shared. And just to let folks know, Helen usually shares her offerings with the Awaken community through our newsletter. So if you're on our newsletter,
Forget to do that.
oh, so Helen's gonna remember to
Yeah.
share this offering so that we can send it out through the Awaken newsletter. Well,
Thank you.
maybe that's a good note to end on, Helen. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation. It was really beautiful and always fantastic to connect with you.
Thank you as well. I appreciate all that you do, and I'm glad we had the chance to connect today.
Yeah.
Say Something Studios.